The discovery of the Vexeri Empire changed everything. Humanity had barely established its first extrasolar colonies when long-range sensors detected the massive energy signatures of their ships entering the Proxima Centauri system. The United Earth Defense Force maintained a cautious distance as they observed these new arrivals. Sleek vessels that seemed to flow through space like liquid metal, their hulls adorned with intricate patterns that pulsed with an otherworldly light. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Endeavour, watching the main display as the first diplomatic transmission arrived from the Vexeri flagship. The alien ambassador appeared on screen, their iridescent scales shifting colors as they spoke in perfectly translated English, a feat that immediately put her on edge. They had been studying humanity for longer than anyone had realized. "We come in peace," the Vexeri ambassador declared, their multifaceted eyes reflecting the starlight. "We are the Vexari, and we seek only to share knowledge and establish trade relations with your species." But Sarah had seen the scans. Behind the diplomatic vessel lurked dozens of warships, their weapon systems dormant but ready. 20 years of military service had taught her to trust her instincts, and everything about this situation felt wrong. The following months seemed to prove her concerns unfounded. The Vexeri shared technological advances that revolutionized human medicine and energy production. They established joint research facilities on Mars, and their representatives became a common sight in the halls of power on Earth. Yet Sarah continued to gather intelligence, building a network of contacts throughout human space. The first warning came from an unexpected source. A small merchant vessel, barely larger than a shuttle, appeared at the edge of Sol's defense perimeter. Its hull was scorched from weapons fire, and its life support systems were failing. Inside, the UES Endeavour's rescue teams found members of a species they'd never encountered before, the Lyrians. Small, with 4 arms and bioluminescent patches across their skin, they were barely alive. After their recovery, the Lyrians told their story. They were refugees, fleeing from Vexeri expansion into their home systems. The Vexeri's peaceful overtures were a carefully constructed facade, masking a systematic campaign of conquest and subjugation. They shared records of entire worlds stripped of resources, of populations enslaved or worse. Sarah took this information directly to the United Earth Council, bypassing the standard chain of command. The evidence was damning, but the Council was hesitant to act. The Vexeri had become too deeply embedded in Earth's economy and scientific community. Any aggressive move could destabilize the entire solar system. Instead, they chose a middle path. Earth would begin secretly establishing humanitarian colonies, hidden deep in unexplored systems, to provide sanctuary for species fleeing Vexeri expansion. The program was designated Operation Safe Harbor, and Sarah was placed in command. The first colony, New Haven, was established in a system with a red dwarf star, its location carefully scrubbed from official records. Within months, refugees from a dozen species found their way there, guided by an underground network of sympathetic traders and scouts. Sarah watched as these diverse beings worked together to build something remarkable, a true multicultural society, united by their desire for freedom from Vexeri influence. But even as New Haven flourished, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The Vexeri ambassadors' visits to Earth became more frequent, their requests for military cooperation more insistent. They spoke of joint defense initiatives, of the need to protect shared interests from unnamed threats. In her private quarters aboard the Endeavour, Sarah reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The Vexeri fleet movements suggested they were preparing for something big. Their ships were congregating in nearby systems, following patterns consistent with invasion preparations, but she needed more concrete evidence before she could convince the Council to act. The answer came in the form of a defector, a mid-level Vexeri military officer who could no longer stomach their empire's actions. The data they brought confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The Vexeri saw humanity as a potential threat, one that needed to be contained and eventually absorbed into their empire. Their peaceful overtures were simply buying time while they positioned their forces. As Sarah prepared her report for the council, she knew that humanity stood at a crossroads. The choices they made in the coming days would determine not only their own fate, but that of countless other species who had placed their trust in Earth's protection. The false peace was about to end, and humanity would need to decide what kind of galactic civilization they truly wanted to be. What Sarah couldn't know, was that the beginning of that end would come not with a grand invasion or diplomatic crisis, but with a single act of barbarism that would awaken something terrible in the human spirit. The Vexeri were about to learn why so many species had sought humanity's protection, and why their greatest mistake would be forcing humanity to choose between peace and justice. The alert came at 300 Earth Standard Time. Admiral Chen was awakened by the harsh buzz of her emergency communicator, its red light casting shadows across her quarters. New Haven's automated defense systems had detected multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace. Vexari warships, their weapons already hot. Status report. She barked, rushing onto the bridge of the Endeavor. Her crew worked with practiced efficiency, but she could see the tension in their movements. 37 Vexari vessels, ma'am, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, his hands flying over the tactical display. They're not responding to hails. Colony shields are at maximum, but they're systematically targeting the generator nodes. Sarah watched in horror as the Vexeri fleet executed a textbook siege pattern. They'd somehow discovered New Haven's location, and they'd come prepared. The colony's defenses were good, she made sure of that. But they weren't designed to withstand this level of concentrated firepower. Launch all fighters, she ordered. And get me a quantum channel to Earth Command. Priority Alpha. But even as the Endeavor's squadrons deployed, Sarah knew they were too far away. New Haven would fall before they could arrive. The best they could hope for was to rescue survivors and document what happened. Her hands clenched into fists as she watched the colony's shields begin to fail. The Vexeri ground forces landed with brutal efficiency. Their combat mechs tore through the colony's remaining defenses like paper, while their infantry moved in precise formations toward specific targets. This wasn't a random attack. They had detailed intelligence about New Haven's layout. Through the colony's surviving security feeds, Sarah and her crew watched in stunned silence as the true horror unfolded. The Vexari weren't just conquering New Haven. They were executing a carefully planned extermination. They're hurting civilians, Rodriguez reported, his voice shaking. But they're separating them. Adults to the right, children to the left. Sarah felt ice in her veins as she realized what they were witnessing. The Vexeri had learned from their past conquests. They understood that adults could be subjugated, controlled through fear and the threat of reprisal. But children grew up to become rebels, resistance fighters, freedom warriors. The Vexeri solution was as simple as it was monstrous. The footage from New Haven would later be seen by billions across Earth and its colonies. The systematic execution of over 3,000 children, human, Lyrian, and dozens of other species, was captured in high-definition clarity. The Vexeri made no attempt to hide their actions. In fact, they seemed proud, broadcasting their work on open channels. When the Endeavor finally arrived, they found New Haven in ruins. The adult survivors were bound in containment fields, forced to watch as the Vexeri soldiers methodically disposed of the bodies of their children. The message was clear: resist, and this would be the consequence. What the Vexeri couldn't understand, was that they had miscalculated on a fundamental level. They had studied human history, analyzed human conflicts, and concluded that such a demonstration would break humanity's will to fight. They were wrong. The quantum transmission reached Earth within hours. Sarah stood before the emergency council, her uniform still stained with ash from the rescue operations. She didn't need to argue or persuade. The footage spoke for itself. The council's vote was unanimous. For the first time in its history, the United Earth government declared a state of total war. Every shipyard, every factory, Every laboratory would be converted to the war effort. Political differences were set aside, old rivalries forgotten. Humanity had found something it hadn't had since the unification: a common purpose. In the days that followed, something changed in human space. The usual bureaucracy and political maneuvering vanished, replaced by a single-minded focus that surprised even Sarah. She watched as civilian ships volunteered for military conversion, as retired veterans flooded the recruitment centers, as research teams worked around the clock to adapt and improve their weapons technology. But most surprisingly, she watched as other species came forward. The Lyrians, despite their losses, offered their expertise in stealth technology. The Keth, a species known for their neutrality, opened their shipyards to Earth's fleet. Even some Vexari, horrified by their empire's actions, defected with crucial intelligence. In her private moments, Sarah mourned for the children of New Haven. She mourned for the peace that had been lost, for the innocence that had been shattered. But she also understood that the Vexari had awakened something they couldn't control. Humanity had always been capable of great violence and great compassion. The Vexari had forced them to choose between their desire for peace and their need for justice. They would soon learn that when humanity chose justice, they pursued it with terrifying dedication. As the first human battle fleets assembled, Sarah received reports of Vexari diplomats attempting to open negotiations. They offered reparations, territorial concessions, technology transfers, but they still didn't understand. This wasn't about territory or technology anymore. This was about ensuring that no species would ever again have to watch their children die to satisfy an empire's paranoia. The war that followed would reshape the galaxy, but its cause could be traced to a single moment, when humanity saw the massacre of innocents and chose to answer not with fear, but with righteous fury. The war room aboard the UES Prometheus hummed with activity as Admiral Chen studied the holographic display of known Vexari space. 3 months had passed since the massacre at New Haven, and humanity had spent that time preparing, not charging blindly into battle, but methodically building the tools of retribution. "Show me the nexus points," Sarah ordered, and the display shifted to highlight the quantum corridors the Vexari used for faster-than-light travel. Their empire relied on these natural phenomena, carefully mapped over centuries. It was their greatest strength and their greatest vulnerability. Dr. Maya Patel, Earth's leading quantum physicist, stepped forward. Her team had been working nonstop since the declaration of war. "We've cracked it, Admiral. The Vexari don't actually understand how their FTL technology works. They discovered it in ruins of an ancient civilization and reverse-engineered it. But we've gone deeper. We're not just copying. We're innovating." The display shifted again, showing a new device that looked deceptively simple. "We call it the quantum lock," Maya explained. "It doesn't just disrupt their FTL travel. It turns their own quantum corridors into traps. Once activated, any ship attempting to use them will be forced into normal space, their engines completely disabled." Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. The Vexari's technological advantage had always been their trump card. But humanity hadn't spent the last century developing its own technology. They'd spent it understanding the fundamental principles behind it. When backed into a corner, humans didn't just adapt technology. They'd revolutionized it. The first strike came at dawn by Earth's reckoning. Operation Righteous Fury began with the simultaneous activation of quantum locks across 37 key transit points in Vexari space. Their mighty empire, built on stolen technology they never truly understood, suddenly found itself fragmented into isolated sectors. But the quantum locks were just the beginning. The real surprise came from an unlikely source: the Lyrians. Their bioluminescent communication had inspired human scientists to develop a new form of quantum entanglement communication that the Vexari couldn't detect or interrupt. For the first time in galactic history, an attacking force could coordinate across light years without fear of interception. The combined fleet struck with precision that would have been impossible just months before. Human ships, Their hulls, now incorporating Keth phase shift technology, appeared seemingly out of nowhere. They weren't just fighting with superior technology. They were fighting with a strategy the Vexari couldn't comprehend. Status report from Battle Group Delta. Lieutenant Rodriguez announced, Vexari shipyards in the Arcturus sector have been neutralized. Minimal civilian casualties. Resistance forces are rising up across 3 systems. That was the key difference between humanity's approach and the Vexaris. Where they sought to crush resistance through fear, humanity offered hope. Each strike was accompanied by broadcasts in all known languages. We are not here to conquer. We are here to liberate. The Vexari response was predictable. They attempted to retaliate against human colonies, but they found only empty space and automated defenses. In the months leading up to the war, Earth had quietly evacuated its vulnerable populations, leaving behind elaborate traps for any would-be invaders. Sarah watched as reports flooded in from across the battlefield. The Vexari military doctrine, unchanged for centuries, had no answer for humanity's adaptive strategies. Their rigid hierarchy crumbled in the face of human officers empowered to make tactical decisions on the fly. But it wasn't just military success that marked this campaign. The real victory was in the growing alliance. Species that had lived under Vexari dominion for generations saw an alternative for the first time. The Keth provided sanctuary for refugees. The Lyrians helped coordinate resistance movements. Even some Vexari commanders, seeing the difference between humanity's targeted strikes and their own empire's brutality, began to question their loyalties. Admiral, Maya interrupted Sarah's thoughts. We're detecting something unusual. The Vexari are attempting to activate some kind of ancient defense system. Energy readings are off the charts. Sarah studied the new data with concern. The Vexari were desperate, and desperate empires made dangerous choices. They were willing to risk everything rather than accept defeat. But humanity had planned for this too. Initiate Protocol Omega, she ordered, and get me a channel to the fleet. All channels, all languages. As she prepared to address not just her forces, but all those fighting for freedom across the galaxy, Sarah thought back to the children of New Haven. Their sacrifice had not just awakened humanity's wrath, it had awakened their determination to build something better than the Vexari Empire. To all forces, she began, her voice carried across the quantum network. The Vexari believe that strength comes from dominance, that unity can only be achieved through fear. Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show them what real strength looks like. The strength of free beings choosing to stand together against tyranny. The battle was far from over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. Humanity had not just brought superior weapons to this war, they had brought hope. And throughout history, hope had always proven to be the most powerful force in the universe. Captain Michael Jung stood in the ruins of a Vexari command center, his combat armor sensors detecting no survivors. The mission had been successful, another strategic target eliminated. Yet he felt no satisfaction, only a deepening weariness that seemed to seep into his bones. All sectors secured, sir, his XO reported. We found their data cores intact. Intel will want to see this. Michael nodded, his attention caught by a holographic display still flickering in the wreckage. It showed what appeared to be a Vexari family unit, not the military leadership they'd been targeting, but ordinary civilians. The image reminded him uncomfortably of the photos he used to keep in his own quarters before New Haven changed everything. Back aboard the UES Nemesis, Admiral Chen's face appeared on his command screen. She looked as tired as he felt. Report, Captain. Target eliminated, he stated flatly. But Sarah, we're finding more civilian installations mixed in with their military bases. They're using their own people as shields now. The Admiral's expression hardened. They think we'll hesitate because of our own moral codes. That will show the mercy they never gave us. Won't we? Michael asked. Isn't that what separates us from them? The question hung in the air between them, encapsulating the dilemma that plagued the entire human fleet. Their victory was increasingly certain. The quantum locks had shattered the Vexari's ability to maintain their empire, and resistance movements were flourishing across formerly subjugated worlds. But with each passing day, the line between justice and vengeance grew thinner. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Elena Santos was dealing with the human cost of that struggle. She treated not just physical wounds, but minds scared by what they'd seen and done. "We're seeing increased rates of PTSD," she reported during the senior staff meeting. "Even among our most hardened veterans. It's not just combat stress, it's moral injury." The war had evolved beyond simple military engagement. Human intelligence networks had infiltrated Vexari society, aided by growing numbers of defectors. They learned that the Empire's brutal tactics had never been universally supported. There were Vexari who had opposed the massacre at New Haven, who had tried to warn humanity in subtle ways. This knowledge complicated everything. It was easier when they could see all Vexari as monsters. Now they had to face a more complex truth, that evil often thrived not through universal participation, but through the silence of those who knew better. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A group of Vexari scientists, led by one who had lost their own offspring to the Empire's purges, made contact through the resistance networks. They offered not just intelligence, but understanding. "Your response to New Haven confused our leadership," the lead scientist, who called herself Dawn Singer, explained to the human command staff. "They expected you to retreat, to sue for peace. They didn't understand that humans have a unique characteristic. You can maintain your civilization, your ethics, even while waging war." This insight proved valuable as humanity refined its approach. They began targeting the Empire's leadership structure with surgical precision, while simultaneously broadcasting proof of the leadership's corruption to the Vexari population. Each strike was accompanied by offers of amnesty for those who opposed the regime's atrocities. But the cost remained high. Michael found himself attending too many memorial services, writing too many letters to families. Each victory seemed to carry a weight that victory alone couldn't justify. During one particularly dark moment, he found himself in the ship's observatory, staring out at the stars. Admiral Chen found him there. "I remember when we first saw their ships," she said quietly. "How beautiful they seemed, how promising." Michael nodded. "We wanted so badly to believe in peaceful first contact. Even after everything, part of me wishes we could have found another way." "The Vexari leadership made their choice," Sarah replied. "But we still get to make ours. Every day, with every decision, we choose what kind of victory this will be." That choice was tested the very next day, when intelligence revealed the location of a major Vexari leadership bunker. Initial scans showed they were using captured children from various species as living shields, believing humans would never risk harming them. They had learned nothing. What followed would become legendary. A precision operation combining human tactical expertise, Lyrian stealth technology, and Keth phase shifting. Over 14 hours, special operations teams infiltrated the facility through dimensions the Vexari couldn't even perceive. Every child was evacuated before the first shot was fired. When the dust settled, the facility was destroyed, its leaders captured, and not a single civilian casualty had been recorded. It sent a message more powerful than any show of force. Humanity would not be forced to abandon its principles, even in pursuit of justice. The price of vengeance remained high, but humanity was proving it could be paid without losing their soul in the process. As Michael watched the rescued children reunite with their families, he realized that perhaps this was the real victory they had been fighting for all along. The Vexari Imperial Palace stood against the purple sky of their homeworld, its crystalline spires reflecting the light of 3 setting suns. Once, it had been a symbol of unquestioned power. Now, it would become something else entirely. Admiral Sarah Chen walked through its corridors, accompanied by representatives from 24 species. The Lyrians' bioluminescence created patterns of light that danced across ancient murals. Keth diplomats phased in and out of visibility, their natural defense mechanism responding to lingering anxiety. and beside her walked Dawn Singer, the Vexeri scientist, whose defection had helped turn the tide of war. "They're waiting in the Grand Chamber," Dawn Singer said softly, "the last of the High Command. They still don't fully understand what has happened." Sarah nodded. The past year had transformed the galaxy in ways few could have predicted. The Vexeri Empire hadn't fallen to military might alone. It had crumbled from within as its own people rose up against leaders who had led them down a path of atrocity. The Grand Chamber doors opened to reveal a scene that would have been unthinkable months ago. The remaining Vexeri leadership stood not as conquerors, but as the defeated. Yet there was no gloating from the assembled representatives of the free worlds. The lessons of New Haven had taught them all that victory meant nothing if it led to the same cycles of violence and revenge. "You stand accused," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the chamber, "not just of crimes against humanity, but crimes against all sentient life. The massacre at New Haven was not your first atrocity, but it will be your last." The trial that followed was broadcast across every world in known space. Evidence was presented not just of the New Haven massacre, but of centuries of systematic oppression and genocide. Yet what surprised many was the response of the coalition. There would be no mass executions, no enslaving of the Vexeri people. Instead, humanity introduced a new concept to galactic law: rehabilitation and reconciliation. Those who had given the orders would face justice, but the focus would be on healing the deep wounds that had led to this moment. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself working closely with Dawn Singer and other reformers to establish what would become known as the Galactic Concordat. It wasn't just a peace treaty, it was a fundamental reimagining of how different species could coexist. The quantum lock technology, which had been so effective as a weapon, was repurposed. Under human guidance, it became the foundation of a new FTL transportation network, freely available to all species who signed the Concordat. The Lyrians' communication innovations were shared, creating bridges between cultures that had once seemed impossibly alien to each other. But perhaps the most profound change came in the form of the Children's Accord. On the very spot where the Vexeri High Command had once ordered the massacre of innocent children, a new institution arose. The Galactic Academy would become a place where young beings from every species could learn together, understanding each other's perspectives and cultures. Sarah stood with Michael Jong at the Academy's inauguration ceremony, watching as the first students arrived. Among them were Vexeri children, walking side by side with humans, Lyrians, and others. They carried with them not just their own hopes, but the dreams of all those who had been lost. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Michael asked quietly, showing mercy when they showed none. Sarah watched as a young Vexeri student helped a human child understand the mathematical principles behind quantum physics, their differences forgotten in the joy of discovery. "We didn't fight this war just to punish them," she replied. "We fought it to make sure nothing like New Haven ever happened again. And sometimes, the best way to honor those we lost is to build something they would have been proud of." The galaxy was entering a new era. The Vexeri Empire's fall had created an opportunity not just for justice, but for genuine transformation. Humanity had proven itself not just in war, but in peace, showing that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when to show mercy. As the three suns set on the first day of the new Concordat, Sarah thought of all those who had sacrificed to reach this moment. The children of New Haven would never see this future, but their memory had helped create it. In responding to darkness with light, to hatred with hope, humanity had not just avenged them, they had honored them in the most meaningful way possible. They had built a future where no child of any species would ever again have to fear the kind of hatred that had taken their lives. And in doing so, they had proven that humanity's greatest strength was not their capacity for righteous fury, but their ability to forge something meaningful from the ashes of tragedy. The stars seemed brighter that night, as if they too were celebrating the dawn of a new age. An age built not on dominance and fear, but on understanding and hope. The galaxy would remember New Haven not just as the place where humanity's wrath was awakened, but as the catalyst that led to a peace more profound than any empire could have enforced. And somewhere, in the great cosmic dance of stars and worlds, the children of New Haven were smiling.